Hello, my name is Rabbi Chaim Belyak. I'm pleased to welcome you to this edition of Freighted Legacies. This is a program that has been offered by the progressive Jewish community that is supported by Friends of Jewish Renewal in Poland. And we're pleased today to have two guests, which I'll be introducing in a moment, for a conversation about being children of survivors and coming to terms with a part of the Polish Jewish past. Friends of Jewish Renewal has been sponsoring uh, progressive Jewish life in Poland, aiding its development in synagogues, in teaching, in classes, and opportunities for people to connect with Judaism. We've been very active in Poland for over 20 years now. Um, the Freighted Legacies program is a newer addition for the last 5 years. We've offered opportunities for people to learn about the Jewish community of uh, Poland, the history of Jews in Poland, the connection between Poles and Jews. And this is, I think, one of the maybe the second or third opportunity we've had to talk with people about their connection to Poland through their parents and being children of survivors. Um, I'm pleased today to welcome Aron Hirt-Manheimer, who is a friend from long ago and has been an active part of the progressive community in America and was the editor of the Reform Judaism magazine for many years. In addition, uh, Aaron's career has taken him to other interests in journalism and in writing, and has been involved with the editing of uh, a book about Elie Wiesel and a book about the Holocaust in Romania. Um, uh, Aaron's longtime friend is Marty Yura. Um, and Marty and Aron met in Los Angeles. Their parents are from Poland, survivors, and they'll tell you about their parents in a little bit. Marty is a graduate of UCLA, and both of them have studied psychology. Marty served um, for a time as a soldier in the Israeli forces and is now currently living in Atlanta, where he's been for the last 40 years and has worked in tech work as well as with a wonderful process of yoga and meditative teaching. The two have an interesting story to tell us about their lifelong friendship. I want to introduce also uh, our colleague David Cater, who's a member of the board of Friends of Jewish Renewal. And before I do that, I've got to add one hosting duty. If you've joined us, please find the globe at the bottom of your screen and choose to listen to this either on the English channel or the Polish channel, whichever one you're most comfortable with. Um, uh, uh, Dr. David Cater is Emeritus Professor of Law at Arizona State University, active in the Jewish community, teaching in many, many subjects, uh, very active in fostering Holocaust memory, and has himself written quite a bit about his own experiences of parents who were survivors. Dr. Cater grew up in Fresno, which is which was a relatively small town uh, during the time of the 50s and 60s. And we'll hopefully have an opportunity to hear about the different experiences. Um, so David and Aron and Marty are going to be telling us a little bit about their background. And David and I are going to do our best to ask them some provocative questions. And then we'll be able to help you appreciate that it is the effort of the two of them to share all of this in the book that they produced, uh, which is called Sons of Survivors. Um, and it has an important subtitle, Making Peace with Inherited Trauma. And I found this to be personally a very moving book because, indeed, as a child of survivors myself, that has been a significant part of my life. So let me begin by asking a little bit about your friendship and your meeting in Los Angeles. And maybe by that you can tell us a little bit about the background of the two of you. Uh, Marty, I'm going to call on you since I know the least about you, and perhaps then you can invite Aron to join you.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for having us. So Aron and I met after I moved to Los Angeles after growing up in the Bronx. I was 16 years old. We met in our last year, actually last semester of high school, and embarked on studies at UCLA for the next 2 years. We were inseparable. We lived in adjacent buildings. It was, of course, apparent that our parents were Holocaust survivors and they got along with each other very well. And after the first 2 years of college, this was just after the Six-Day War, we decided that Israel was important to us. Up in that till that time, we had never discussed anything about our parents' history, despite being obvious that they had shared that portion of their lives in concentration camps. So we spent a year in Israel studying. We came back. We were inspired Zionists, completed our studies the following year. I immigrated almost immediately to Israel, Aron shortly after that. I lived in Israel for another 5 years. I served as an officer in the Israeli Defense Forces for that time, um, returning to LA, continuing my studies, and Aron and I continued to not be in communication for several decades after that. But at some point, a serendipitous event occurred. Aron's daughter and her husband and their toddler were stuck in the Atlanta airport on Christmas Eve. Flights were canceled. Aron reached out to me, or his daughter Mimi did, and we hosted them for the night. And when she got back home, she approached Aron with this question: "How come you two don't get together more? Everything's the same. Their homes are the same. The tchotchkes are the same. The warmth of their and love of their families are the same." And that prompted an occasion for us to resume our friendship. And up to that point, I'm going to now turn it over to Aron because things progressed differently from there. But go for it.
So it wasn't until we reunited after that Atlanta incident that we began to think about and broach the subject of the Holocaust and our roots. And it was only then that we discovered that both our fathers were Auschwitz prisoners. Both our mothers were in slave labor camps, part of the Gross Rosen complex. And that surprisingly, that we were both conceived in the same displaced persons camp. Feldafing in the US occupied zone of Germany. So once we started talking about it a little bit, um, something happened. Marty read a book that impacted him that would eventually lead to doing our book. Marty, you want to say something about that?
Yeah, it was a book called The Dude and the Zen Master, and it was written by Jeff Bridges, who played the role of the dude in the wonderful movie The Big Lebowski, and Bernie Glassman, who founded the Zen Peacemakers. And uh, part of how Bernie Glassman expresses the what the Zen Peacemakers was about is that for the past 20 years, he convened a group of people for an immersion retreat, a 5-day immersion retreat in Auschwitz-Birkenau. And the intent of the retreat was based on the three tenets of the Zen peacemakers. One is to come from a context of not knowing, like having as open a mind as was possible. Two, to bear witness, to have a role, a responsibility, not to just observe, but to play that role of bearing witness to what had occurred there. And then the third is to take loving action as a result of the first two. So that got me after a lifetime of avoiding virtually any inquiry into the Holocaust, into my parents' histories. And as a result of that, I returned. Aron and I talked. I wrote an article about it that he had published. And at some point, I reached out to him and said, I'd kind of like to write a book. And my wife, we've been married 41 years, has for decades urged me, encouraged me to no avail to write about my past, my parents, my family history. And this was the opportunity, the stimulus that prompted that. And Aron said, why don't we write it together? And that's how we launched our book.
So then, shortly after that, um, we thought, perhaps we follow the same format as the Dude and the Zen Master, which is recording a conversation, and out of that would come a book. So Marty flew in to Connecticut for a few days so that we can begin recording the book. Well, it didn't take us long to realize that we knew hardly anything about our parents' past. There were huge gaps in our knowledge. And we realized that this project would take time. We had a lot of asking to do. We had a lot of research to do, but nevertheless, we were committed to doing it. And part of the reason that we were so unprepared was because our parents followed very different strategies about revealing what had happened to them. Marty, you want to take it?
Yeah. So Aron's parents were more disclosing to him and his sister. I'm the only kid, the only child, and my parents not only were the opposite end of that continuum, the entire family was part to a conspiracy of silence, if you will. They did not intentionally reveal anything, hardly anything about the past, and they thought that would shelter me from more than I could handle, and I kind of bought into that and adopted that. And maybe the best way to describe it is don't ask, don't tell. So I came in with a clean slate, well, not quite a clean slate, but an emptier slate. And Aron's family had a different approach to that. One of the things we discovered that it didn't matter. We got to the same place and different routes, but whether our parents were disclosing or not, did not matter.
I asked my mother recently. My mother is 105 and lives in Los Angeles, and she's still a great source of information. And I asked her if she and my father had ever considered not telling me and my sister at a young age, at a tender age, about the Holocaust. And she said, never. You needed to know the truth, because if you didn't know the truth, you could never understand me. You can never understand what I went through and what your father went through. So they did, well, I realized that my father also, only in hindsight, that he and I had never had a conversation about the Holocaust. But I did know three things. I knew that they were engaged uh, in 1941, so that was during the occupation. My mother was from Dumbrava, my father from Bendin. They met, they were engaged, they had an engagement party in Dumbrava, and the following week it was to be in Bendin. But during that week, my mother was picked up and deported to Greenberg, a concentration camp. And so the party was canceled, obviously, the second one. So I knew about that. And I knew about what happened to them after their camps were evacuated in 1945, as the Red Army was approaching Auschwitz, where my father was. And so what happened then, my father was evacuated 2 days before the liberation of Auschwitz. And the worst time for him and for my mother and for many of the concentration camp survivors occurred after they were evacuated and forced on death marches. I knew that my father, I don't know how I knew exactly, but I knew that my father was on a cattle car leaving Auschwitz. Somewhere along the way. He jumped off the train and was shot through the chest by a guard, by a sentry. And he was left to die there, but some people, locals, picked him up, took him to a hospital. They patched him up, and noticing the Auschwitz prisoner number on his arm, tattooed on his arm, they called the Gestapo. He was arrested and put on another train to Mauthausen concentration camp in Austria. And because he had tried to escape, he was given special punishment. I later learned through my research that he arrived in Mauthausen exactly 3 weeks after he was evacuated from Auschwitz. So in 3 weeks, shot through the chest. When the Americans liberated Mauthausen on May 5th, 1945, they pulled him off a pile of corpses. He barely survived. Another day, he would be gone. That was May 5th, 1945. My mother was on a death march for over 3 months. 1,000 girls were marched through the winter of 1945, her group toward Czechoslovakia. Toward the end of the march, on May 5th, 1945, she and 20 other women were put on the back of a truck because she couldn't walk anymore, and they couldn't go any further, to be shot in the woods. While the truck was going down the road to end their lives, a US fighter plane flew over, strafed the truck. The 2 German women guards were hit and injured. And during the confusion, my mother and her friend, the woman she shared a bunk with in Greenberg, got themselves off that truck into the woods. And that was the end of the war for them. And think about it, Hitler was already dead and they were still marching and killing these girls. So the same day they were liberated in different parts of Europe. They found each other after the war. Um, they were married in Feldafing in 1947. So it took 6 years from their engagement to their being married. And I was born a year later and in Feldafing. And then in 1951, when I was 3 years old, we immigrated to the United States. Uh, so
Aron,
that
go ahead.
no, I'm finished with that segment, and I could keep going and tell you the whole book, but you know, so how our parents met is at the beginning of the book. How we met is at the prologue. How our, the book is composed of alternating stories. I tell a story, and Marty tells a story throughout the entire book, and it goes through our youth and our lives, uh, everything that happened to us. Uh, through our lives and with lots of stories. And uh, running through it is we, how trauma was part of the mix. But we can get more into that later. And I welcome your questions.
I've got a question, and I'm inviting David Cater to join us whenever he's ready as well. Uh, I'm struck by the fact that we began with the question of what were we told as kids and how little we knew. Um, but yet you grew up with other families, whether it was mostly in Los Angeles, but both of you had other people who had had the same experience. How does a story that is known by everybody around you not get imparted in some way to the two of you? I'm interested in how uh, what did you absorb that was there but maybe not articulated? Marty, maybe you could
Well,
respond.
so again, back to the Bronx, there were, I had forgotten this. I just kind of connected to my old friend, my oldest best friend. This week, we talk on each other's birthdays. And he reminded me there were a couple of kids on the block whose parents were survivors. But again, it was whether by intent, as it was in my family, or just default, nobody talked about it. So there was nobody else in my age with whom I commiserated or talked about or any reference other than that's what happened. They were survivors of the Holocaust. And I think we encountered that as well, being older and going through school. It was just, we didn't go down that tunnel. So the general background was apparent, uh, details were absent.
But one thing that you point out, um, the Yiddish-speaking survivor community was a very tight-knit community, and part of the reason is uh, other people didn't understand us. We were the green, and American Jews who were not immigrants and refugees were the Americana. And the Americana had generally little interest in hearing the stories of the survivors. In fact, the survivors were maybe considered kind of damaged goods, uh, even worse, suspected of possibly having done some immoral, shameful things in order to survive. So there was a bit of suspicion. And on top of that, perhaps there was some guilt on the part of the American Jewish community, which did so little to fight the policy of the Roosevelt administration's policy of not allowing Jews in to the country to escape almost certain death. So uh, we were kind of left on our own. Self-help groups, uh, almost all our friends were my friends were children of survivors. even at my 70th birthday party that Marty attended, um, I only realized, and I invited my best friends, maybe 6 guys who had had a big influence on my life. All but one of them had at least one parent in Auschwitz. So that was pretty amazing to me to think about. It's something that had never occurred to me, but it's just that we were part of this almost closed community that really shaped us in ways that maybe we didn't understand. So whether, as Marty said earlier, whether these things were spoken or unspoken, there was a powerful presence, an undercurrent of who we are that impacted us, influenced our decisions about our own identity, about our relationships, about who we would trust. I remember as a child, that may be longer, I had this very high standard of trust for a non-Jew, for a Gentile. Would they hide me in their basement if things got really bad? So there's an assumption that things at some point could get really bad. That's part of the trauma. And so it's understandable that people who have similar backgrounds, similar fears, would stick together. And that's how it was.
Maybe,
David,
yes, Rabbi, maybe I could press on this point a little bit more because I think it is utterly fundamental. But before doing so, I want to thank you both for the book and for your willingness to take this time to talk with us, and especially a mighty congratulations, if that's the right word, to your mother for her long and I hope good life of 105. I'm in the high holiday season. I'm so taken by that. The question I have is this inherited trauma phrase. There is obviously, and I think you both have spoken to this indirectly so far this morning here in Arizona, there's a gap between substantive knowledge, of which you provided us some, of what happened, literally what happened to one's parents, and the realization, even as very young kids, that there's something different here. Beyond the word survivor, there's something different. And so the way I shared this with Rabbi Haim before is that there's somehow a nonverbal communication of the Shoah. It's somehow the trauma, not the information, but the reality of, I don't know what other word to use, of this trauma is somehow, to use the subtitle, inherited. And I'm not talking now about any genetic inheritance. I'm talking about some kind of communication that conveys to you the trauma that lingers and lives on, that you have to then deal with as adults and certainly as we get to our senior ages. So without me going on and belaboring the point too much more, the question really is, do you have memories, early memories as a 3, 4, 5, 6-year-old that conveyed to you only in retrospect maybe this transmission of the trauma, but it wasn't verbal. It wasn't telling a story, the disclosure of information about your parents' lives, but that you knew that something horrible happened and that you were essentially absorbing it non-verbally.
And may I tell you a story that I think speaks to what you're saying?
Please.
Um, through a series of events, very mysterious events, I too had never planned to go to Poland, to my father's town, my mother's town, to Auschwitz. But I was at a bar mitzvah party in Philadelphia, and 2 men came up to me and they said, "We were just in Bendine, and saw your father's house where your family lived. Uh, they pulled up their sleeves and showed me their Auschwitz numbers as if they had to prove anything, that they were the real thing. And they asked me, do you ever plan to go there? And uh, I said, not really. But then I saw how disappointed they were. And I said, well, maybe it's possible. Uh, so please make me a little map of where that house is. So one of them took out their business card and he wrote a little map. They lived right next to the train station. So the house right next to the station, you can't miss it. Okay, I put it in my wallet. 2 or 3 weeks later, I get a call from an Jewish advertising agency. They're sponsoring a Jewish tour of Poland because Poland was interested in Jewish tourism. It was shortly after the end of communism. And I said, would you like to go? Because I was the editor of the largest Jewish publication, Reform Judaism. And I said, only if it includes a stop in Benjamin. And I'll get back to you. They get back to me and said, yes, it's very close to Auschwitz. We're going to the Auschwitz Memorial, so we'll stop in Bending. So we get there, the van arrives, and right away I see the train station, and right away I see the building. And I get out and I take some pictures, and nothing is really happening emotionally. It's just the building, I'm not relating to this place. Well, then we take a little walk. I think it's Malakovsky Street, the main street. And suddenly it hits me that, wait a minute, if Hitler hadn't come and changed the course of history, my parents were engaged here. 1940, I would have been born here. I would have been a totally different person. What happened to my parents didn't happen to me. I'm not from this place. And suddenly, the imaginary number flew off of my arm. And I felt liberated for the first time. I was 47 years old, and I had not emotionally separated myself from the trauma of what happened, the trauma my parents experienced and the loss they experienced. It was inside of me as if it happened to me. And that was the first time that I really felt that it didn't happen to me, and that I separated myself from that experience. But I had to be there for that to happen. So I think, they're unimaginable, that something inside of you could be so powerful, and yet it hadn't revealed itself to you until the right moment. And that was the moment.
That is a very moving story, powerful. But what I'm curious about, if I may press a little bit more, is how what you became liberated from got in you to begin with, which I assume is from childhood, even though one didn't have a narrative one could share as a 3-year-old, a 4-year-old, a 5-year-old. It's one thing to know that you're in a certain community. It's another thing to absorb some trauma.
Well, we absorbed the trauma.
Well,
We heard
let me
this.
just, oh, I'm sorry, Aaron.
No, I was just going to say we absorbed all that pain, and if you love your parents and they love you, and they've gone through something, we can't articulate it. We don't have to be able to explain it. We don't have to know the facts or the details, but it absolutely gets absorbed into who we are, and that's why that trauma, passes, and it passes from generation to generation. Marty, go ahead.
The narrative is ancillary to what we're talking about, to the trauma. So it maybe packs it a little bit to an extent, maybe prompts it to an extent, but the visceral experience is distinct from the narrative. hence, whether the narrative was shared by Aron's parents and not by mine, did not affect how we each experienced at the, not at the end of the day, but throughout the course of our lives, how we experienced that same angst, that same imminent sense of loss or catastrophe that accompanied us, whether more in the background, but sometimes very much in the foreground. So that addresses that. It didn't matter how you told the story or whether the story was told or not. That only added to or framed or provided a way of relating to everything else that was going on beneath the surface.
I'll just share with you in the notes in chat somebody that Aron, I believe, knows and we know from Richard Cohen shared with us the reference to the new research on epigenetics as a transmitter of trauma. Maybe giving it a big name helps us to frame it in. Roz Gold has just written a question of another person I think Aron knows. In what ways do you see the trauma expressing itself in your children?
Um, I think it's different. Well, each child is different. My daughter, we interviewed our children, my three and Marty's three, for the book, asking them that question: what was it like being the child of second generation? And my daughter, Mimi, the one who met Marty in Atlanta, she said, I don't think of myself as third generation. I think of myself as second generation, just like you, because I react to everything in the way I understand you react to everything. So that was basically her understanding. One of my sons said, it's just miraculous that your parents survived, found each other, you were born, and I was born, and I believe there's a guardian angel looking over our family and just focusing on the survival. And he said, I don't believe in that we're victims. I believe that this was a victory. This is a victory of our family over hate. All my kids and all my grandkids are in awe of my mother. They all feel tremendous pride in being generations removed from ground zero. And they totally accept that they are in this line and to bear witness and to have this responsibility, and have done it, and totally they're all have a lot of menschlichkeit and love, and all that has come down from generation to generation. We're very fortunate that way because, talking about trauma, Marty and I received greater measures of love than, we feel it outweighed the trauma. There are other children of survivors, unfortunately, whose parents, did not look forward, and just, our parents had a lot of pain and suffering. There's no question about it. But they really chose life, and they really chose love, and they chose to look forward and not backward. And what they gave us was very precious. And that's why I think Marty and I felt empowered. Trauma does not necessarily mean it hurts you. It could also help you. It's how if you accept it as this is what it is, this is who I am, and now what do I do with it to make a better life? So that's where we're coming from. it's a long answer, Raj, but
Um,
all our
I wonder if you talk about your children. Um,
We share that, I think, the two of us. Uh, and part of the outcomes of those interviews are we did describe in the book. So for me, all my kids uh, were saddled with a overcautiousness. So it was not like a choice on my part. I was um, just cautious, and they could tell, and it didn't stop them, and they did all kinds of things and continue to live vibrant, active lives. But they were clear that I was in the background, aware, certainly, and perhaps even fearful of some calamity, of some imglick that lurks out there. But similar, we're not giving away the kind of the end of the story, but the book really concludes with our realization that not only that our parents, as was most of that generation, able to turn the corner, to kind of face forward and focus on the possibility of the future and embrace the privilege of having survived and being alive and having a whole new world and children and black and white from what they had experienced a short time before. I think that's even though the book is about how we navigated through the trauma, it's also about how we were successful at coming out stronger. Like Aron said, it empowered us, and that is not a predictable outcome of trauma. It not inherited nor experienced, and that was the remarkable accomplishment of their generation, and to an extent, our generation, and what we are propagating and continuing in our kids and our grandkids.
Maybe I could jump on that thought of children and grandchildren and see if I can broaden the context just a little bit. I believe, I may be wrong, and I apologize in advance, that our two authors and Rabbi Haim and myself were all in our 70s somewhere. And I think what I'm going to say is basically true, that of our generation, certainly in the West, Jewish identity, whether it be religious or secular, was anchored in two realities: the reality of the Holocaust and the creation of the state of Israel. I think with time, when I think of my kids and my grandkids, four of them, that the reality of the Holocaust is waning as a identity influencer. And the state of Israel, certainly if we want to talk about contemporary affairs, but for a number of years, has also been marginalized. How many have gone? How many visit? I and my father went, and I've been there 3 or 4 times, but what about children, grandchildren, so forth? So the question I guess I have is this legacy, the other part of your subtitle, which is so wonderful. How does it, I suppose, thrive going forward with these two identity anchors becoming marginalized?
That's a good
I
question.
I think.
if
Go
if
ahead,
I
Mark.
could just amplify the question a little bit, I actually am experiencing uh, that given the events since October 7th, in a way, the question of Holocaust background um, and the importance of the State of Israel have shifted. Um, um, and I'm wondering if you can incorporate how our contemporary moment has also influenced uh, uh, these two anchors.
Well, so let me give myself as an example. So I immigrated to Israel in 1970. It was, and decided, I kind of got myself drafted. Uh, One of the easier choices of my life at the time. You know, I could have been a poster boy for Zionism. So 50 years since I've left Israel. It's not the same place. So what the anchors that you're referring to, David, those benchmarks of modern Jewish history. And so I'm not offering a solution here. I'm in as much of a dilemma as anybody else. But if you look on a continuum where I was 55 years ago, where I am now, not only is Israel different, I'm totally different. I'm at the other end of the continuum. And I suspect that that may be a trend given the last 2 years. And I don't know how it's going to play out. So that's a big question. I think our generation, our kids, and I don't know about our grandkids. I don't know. And that's to an extent, not a totally existential question or issue, but to an extent, it is an existential issue of how do we relate to the world, given that those two anchors have shifted, or at least one of them has shifted, and it's tainted the earlier one.
Aron?
I would just say, as we move away from, we're 80 years out from the end of World War II. It's quite amazing that there is so much interest in the world and in the Jewish community, interest in the Holocaust. I think I saw a study not long ago that it's what do Jews identify with, most, and it's like almost at the very top. Jews identify with remembering the Holocaust as part of their Jewish identity, more than spirituality, more than social action. It is an anchor still. I don't know how long it will be, but it is an anchor, just as every major event in Jewish history is still an anchor. We don't forget the catastrophes that have happened. They become part of who we are. They're incorporated into our ritual, into our calendar. So there's really no telling, how much that's going to continue to be a focus of Jewish identity. Israel as well. We're going through a very rough time, obviously, where many people are vilifying Israel, and it's very painful for us, and it's not just attacking the government; it's attacking the existence of Israel. So these are challenges, but with all that happening, and all the increase in anti-Semitism, and I live in this little town in Richfield, Connecticut, and our congregation is booming. Our preschool and our congregation, all the grades, like, can't get enough teachers. There's so many students, so many families joining. All my kids are part. I've got 2 granddaughters becoming bat mitzvah next week. So some things are counterintuitive. When you think people are going to run away and hide, they're coming forward and affirming, even though there are 3 police cars outside the synagogue. It's not keeping them away, not keeping us away. So, when Marty says that we just don't know, but some things are counterintuitive. And we can't assume that as we get further away from the Holocaust, that the Holocaust will not retain its significance and importance. People may relate to it differently. Certainly, second generation does from those who were in it, and the third generation from us, and the fourth generation, we don't know. We just don't know because we cannot predict the future.
I want to bring in a voice, another question, which you've been answering, Aron, but it I think, comports with my own experience as well. The question actually comes from a longtime friend of mine who traveled with me in 1967 when we both went to save the Jewish people. I did that by fighting the Battle of the Chicken Coop at Kibbutz Matsuba. Um, and Sissy Lax was part of the group uh, that came, that was with me. She asks, um, how does your Jewishness connect at this moment? Um, how do you practice? What do you believe? How does it contrast or cohere with what your parents believe? Um, and I think that's a important note for us to um reflect on. I would add, just because I'm asking the question, and I'm going to answer it a little bit in traditional Jewish practice. Um, these events since October 7th have made me more Jewish. Um, and I think they've forced me to think about the sustaining continuity that Judaism has provided. Um, Even though there was tremendous arguments and breakups and anger at the uh, questions of how to carry the memory of the Holocaust and how to um, reflect on the state of Israel and its government, and uh, uh, the these two anchors remain, even though they the force of what they mean has shifted, and Judaism remains the the theme that connects the two more than I understood at any other time. I'm going to open it up to you, Marty, and Aron, to reflect on that. I noticed that you taught Sunday school.
I did when my kids were younger, and it surprised me, and it surprises me that I did that now as much as it may surprise you. But I did do that, and it started with an invitation from the rabbi at the temple in Atlanta because I thought I had something to contribute. And the main topic of the curriculum, the sixth grade curriculum at the time, was the Holocaust. So I did that. Uh, I don't know how well I did it. I don't know what the outcomes have been. I taught 5 years, a few different grades. Um, but I have to say now, given what you said, Rabbi, it's not, the last 2 years have not made me feel more Jewish. I think this going into our pasts has reinforced that for me. But I have uh, not quite solid ground to stand on here. There's a great quote that says, when you've come to the end of all the light you've known and you're faced with total darkness, having faith is knowing that one of two things shall occur. Either you'll be left with solid ground to stand on, or you'll be taught to fly. And I think it's at that point of having faith without holding on to anything concrete, without having certainty, but there is a trust I have in that. So if anything, I'm not. It's not about giving up, despite my political appetite. It is still holding on to that faith. And that quote, by the way, is from Edward Teller, the father of the hydrogen bomb. So I hold with that. How it'll play out, you know, it's more than I can chew on. uh, as far as where we are in the trajectory of Judaism in life in the world.
Thank you. Thank you. Aron?
For me, the center of Jewish practice is our Shabbat table. Every Friday night, my family, the grandchildren, children, we gather. We have a fresh baked challah, light the candles, and and celebrate Shabbat together. It's not so much the synagogue, though we very much support the synagogue and are involved in many ways. For me, what's important, I think the key to this whole thing is to feel commanded. It's something inside of you, that still soft voice, that Pintele Yid, the eternal light that's inside of you, or something, in my case, it's the saving remnant in the DP camps who wanted to devote their last strength to tikkun olam, to making a better world. And for me, I feel commanded to carry on that message. It could come, for 45 years, I was kind of a voice of the reform movement. I edited the major magazine, and all these, keeping Judaism alive and supporting Israel and remembering the Holocaust. This was my life. This was my life's work, but it all comes from the voices that I inherited, coming from that world. So that's another very positive force, a grounding force, as Marty might say, in my life. And and that's how I move forward. Marty and I, we both talk in the book about my father was angry at God. My mother believed that God saved her life. They come from totally opposite positions theologically. And I just had to find my own way. And, my own way is to understand that forces of evil, forces of hate and cruelty will always be with us. Anti-Semitism will always be with us. And my answer, not only, out of the positive and to fight the negative, is to embrace my otherness. That's what Marty's father did. He writes in the book that Marty asked him the question, what would you have done during the Inquisition if they were going to burn you alive, or, to denounce your Judaism? And he said, let them. And that's it. We are Jewish, regardless of what we believe, all these influences. We are that saving remnant. Every Jew alive today is part of the saving remnant, because this is not, the Holocaust is not the only trauma. Our people have gone through so many traumas. Most Jews, when given the opportunity throughout history, have found the exit door and left. It's the few who continue this journey, and we are among those few, and that is what we believe and hopefully convey to our children, and to keep alive the message of Judaism and the message of our ancestors.
Thank you, Aron. Marty, I'm going to invite you in a moment to give a last word, and I'm going to invite David, if you'd like to add a word. We had many, many, many things that we thought would take us in directions in this conversation. I'm very moved by the book, and it is I think, a profound invitation at this particular time to hear your voices. It is a contribution to help us, other children of survivors, but Jews across the board, to hear the different directions and complexities of your life. David, would you like to add a concluding remark?
Well, I want to just express my gratitude, both Marty and Aron, for undertaking this project. It couldn't have been easy, but you have given us all a great gift. And I must say, hearing Marty's remarks and then Aron's in response to Rabbi Haim's question about how things go forward, it reminded me of my law study where I'd read a majority opinion and agree with it, and then read the dissenting opinion and agree with it. I think both of your thoughts are in my head before you even spoke them. In other words, I'm both a skeptic and a believer. And so maybe that's the nature of the wrestling that is our fate. But so thank you both.
Thank you.
I have to say, Rabbi, one last thing. This morning, my wife told me this is a good time for you to have written this book. So this conversation validates that. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing with us today the story of your friendship and the lives of your family. We hope that you will find many readers, and I consider this opportunity to have an initial conversation. I had meant to reveal at some point that Aron's mother and my mother were on the same death march, and that they were liberated together. Many other coincidences, including the fact that recently I was in Poland, and I was given a book about my mother's town, which will be one of our conversations. This book is now in Polish, so we are planning to make sure it's translated. It's an 800-page book put together by a man named Krzysztof Kocjan, who has documented the history of every Jew that was alive in this little town in 1939. And it turns out by the coincidence that we looked up Aron's mother's maiden name, which at this moment I'm forgetting. Aron, what's her name? Mother's maiden name? Pardon?
Kestenberg.
So in the index, I look up Kestenberg, and it turns out that one of his cousins was married to one of my cousins and lived across the street from my mother in the town of Olkusz. So there was yet these, I don't know what the significance of these discoveries for us will be, but it provides me with a sense that the learning and the connections that we feel are part of something that we're still trying to unravel and find significance in. I want to thank both of you for spending this morning with us. I wish you great success with this book and all that you've sparked in those of us who had the privilege of reading it. I want to mention to our audience that we want to thank Dominika Zakarszewska, who has been mastering the electronics and so forth. Marek Józowski, who is the former president of Beit Warszawa and Beit Polska, the progressive Jewish community in Poland. Marjana Szymanska, who has been a faithful member of our community, active in translating and bringing this to the Polish audience. I'll be interested to hear how people viewing this in Poland will react to this particular conversation. And I want to thank all of you. I want to remind you that on November 9th, Freighted Legacies will welcome back Dr. Joanna Michlitz, who's a social and cultural historian And the topic of her conversation is going to be the question of Eastern European memory and the politics after the Cold War, from 1989 to 2025. This topic is uh, something that she's been pursuing in her research. Um, much of her research talks about the fate of children and the fate of families after the Holocaust, but she's also presented an important intellectual connection to what has gone on in Poland as well. And we look forward to welcoming her back for the second or third time to speak to us in our Freighted Legacy series. Again, Aron, and it was good to see you after so many years, and Marty, to meet you. And I want to thank our audience and wish everyone a Chag Sameach as we enter what may be a season of joy on many levels. And we would love to experience that, um, not only for ourselves, but for others as well. Chag Sameach, and thank you all.